Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Colonel Frank Colley. We warmly welcome the family of Private Joseph Thomas Young and Corporal Joseph Thomas Young, whose stories will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge Rear Admiral Hiroyuki Izumi, Vice Commandant, Joint Staff College, Japan, Major General Gwyn Jenkins, Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, United Kingdom, and the accompanying delegations. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Thank you. Please be seated if you're able to do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Joseph Thomas Young and his brother, Corporal Joseph Thomas Young. Joseph Young, known as Joe, was born in 1897, the eldest child in the large family of Tom and Jessie Young. His father had come to Australia from England as a young man and settled near his Australian-born wife's family on Chatsworth Island. Joe was born during the brief period the family spent living in Mororo. Joe attended local public school and went on to work as a farm labourer, particularly in the sugarcane industry. He was described as a fine stamp of Australia's young men and was a keen participant in local football, foot racing and rowing. Joseph Young enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in February 1915, putting his age up by nearly a year to do so. He underwent a period of training in Australia before leaving for active service overseas with the newly raised 25th Battalion in June 1915. He continued training in Egypt before reaching Gallipoli in September. Private Young was on Gallipoli for just a few weeks before falling ill with dysentery. Despite being evacuated to Budros, his condition worsened and he was eventually sent to hospital in England to recover. After almost 10 months, Joe Young was well enough to return to his battalion, which by this time was fighting on the battlefields of the Western Front in France. About a month after reaching the front, Young was evacuated with illness. He spent the second half of 1916 being treated at various hospitals and then rejoined his unit in France in February 1917. The 25th Battalion spent most of the first half of this year rotating in and out of the front line, although it did not carry out a major offensive role until later in the year. On the 29th of September 1917, the 25th Battalion formed part of the first wave of the attack at the Battle of Menin Road. The attack was successful and was followed up with the capture of Brunsinda early the following month. On the 1st of November 1917, the 25th Battalion re-entered the front line on Brunsinda Ridge, relieving the 26th Battalion. As they were moving forward, the men came under an enemy bombardment, which included gas shells. Gas bombardments continued throughout the day, and the slight wind did little to remove pools of gas in valleys and low-lying places. The men were relieved within 24 hours. Exhausted, they made their way to billets, with a reported 90% suffering from the effects of gas, at least half having lost their voice and with watering eyes. By the 3rd of November, Private Young could stand no more and reported sick as a result of the gas bombardment. He was sent to hospital in England to recover, taking more than 3 months to do so. He rejoined his battalion for the last time in February 1918. On the 10th of June 1918, the 25th Battalion participated in the Third Battle of Moulincourt. As they left their trench, the men came under heavy fire from the enemy, causing nearly 200 casualties among the attacking troops. One of those that did not return was Private Joseph Young. A wounded sergeant coming out of the battle saw his body lying near the road. He had been killed by shell fire. He was 21 years old. In the confusion of the battle, his body was later lost, and today he is commemorated on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. Joseph Young's mother was pregnant with her 11th child when her eldest was killed. On the 29th of July, 1918, a son was born at Maclean, and he was named Thomas Young, in honour of his brother, and would come to be known as Young Joe. Young Joe grew up on Chatsworth Island on the Clarence River and attended Chatsworth Island Public School and later Maclean High School. Away from school, he spent time around the Clarence River, where he especially enjoyed swimming and rowing. When he was able, Young moved to Sydney, seeking greater opportunities. By the time the Second World War began, he was living in Newtown and was working as a labourer in a foundry. He had also met and begun a relationship with Violet McGavin, a machinist from Annandale. On the 26th of April 1941, they were married at St Stephen's Church in Newtown. Young enlisted for service with the militia at Marrickville on the 5th of January 1940, joining the 55th 53rd Battalion. Mobilised for service in New Guinea, the battalion embarked from Sydney on the 28th of December 1941 and disembarked at Port Moresby on the 3rd of January 1942. Young saw combat for the first time during the Kokoda campaign, which lasted from July to October 1942. During the arduous campaign, Young was promoted to corporal. The 55th 53rd Battalion spent some time resting and refitting after Kokoda, and it was not until December that the battalion was again ready for action. On the 5th of December, the 55th 53rd Battalion was flown from Port Moresby to Popondetta and Dobadura. The battalion marched to the Sanananda track, where, along with the 49th Battalion, they relieved the 16th Brigade on the 6th of December. The next day, the 55th and 53rd and the 49th Battalions commenced their attack on the Japanese at Sanananda. The battle was fierce, and the Australians were unable to break through the Japanese positions. Both Australian battalions suffered heavy casualties, with the 49th suffering 229 men, more than half its fighting strength, killed, wounded and missing. The 55th 53rd Battalion suffered 130 men, killed, wounded and missing. Among the dead was Joseph Young. Young was initially buried where he was killed, but his remains were later reinterred at Bromana War Cemetery at Port Moresby. He was 24 years old. His younger brother Sydney also served during the war, returning to Australia in late 1945. The elder Joseph Young's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. Young Joe's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. Their photographs are displayed today beside the pool of reflection. Private Joseph Young is on the right, and Corporal Joseph Young is on the left. This is but one of many family stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Joseph Thomas Young and Corporal Joseph Thomas Young, who gave their lives for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.